Good morning, I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light. Jeff will join us a little bit later in the show. A ceasefire between Israel and Hamas took effect in Gaza this morning. This comes hours after Israel's cabinet approved a deal to pause the fighting and exchange the remaining hostages for Palestinian prisoners. The ceasefire marks a key step toward ending the two-year war that has killed more than 67,000 people. Now, back here at home, the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps are celebrating their 250th anniversary, a time to remember the men and women who dedicate their lives to serving our country. The Morning Light panel will talk about what it means to be dedicated to a calling. And later in the show, Dr. Charles Tindley was an African-American Methodist minister who led one of America's largest Black congregations in Philadelphia. But he was also a gospel music composer, penning some of our most enduring hymns. Jeff will take us on a Pennsylvania faith trail. Now, on October 13th, 1775, the U.S. Navy was created. The following month, November 10th, the Marine Corps was formed. On Sunday, the festivities kicked off at the Naval Station Norfolk at the world's largest naval base.
It is now our time to take big risks to save our country. And it is our duty to honor our past generations and their staggering sacrifices, for which we owe them a huge debt of gratitude.
Now, more events are taking place over the next week in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. In Philadelphia and Camden, visitors can tour historic ships from the American Revolution to today. There will be aviation flyovers, performances by the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps bands, and a parade in downtown Philly, all showcasing the history and future of the Navy and Marine Corps. These are men and women who have made a commitment. So what does it mean to make a commitment? A faith commitment? Well, we will ask our Morning Light panel that very question this morning. Back with me this morning, Kurt Weaver, Davis Younts, and Joe Slack. Thank you for joining me again. When we talk about commitment, it's a big thing, and there have been two really important people in my life who have made some firm commitments. When I want to talk about my father and my father-in-law, they both show what commitment is. My father joined the Navy in 1955, and my father-in-law joined the Marines in 1963. They signed up, and they were there for 4 years, and that was their job, and that's what they do. They knew it was going to be a hard thing, but they did it. And Davis, that's why I wanted to take this first question to you. You made a commitment to the military. How did you feel that this was God's calling?
You know, I think part of it was just I knew if there was an opportunity, I would serve. I just sort of grew up with that instilled in me. Both of my grandfathers served, one in Korea in the Marines, one in the Navy during World War II. So there's this, if that moment came, I knew God was going to put me there. And so for me, it was law school. I was in law school when 9/11 happened. And I just knew, I remember everything about it so vividly here in central Pennsylvania, the way it impacted us. And from that moment, I knew it was going to be my time to serve. So out of law school, I served in the United States Air Force. I did active duty for over a decade and 20 years of total service.
Wow, amazing. Yes, thank you. And thank you to your family's history of doing that as well. Kurt, you were called to a different mission. How did you feel that God was calling you?
Yeah, whether it's, military service or pastoral ministry or serving in government or whatever the Lord calls us to, we are called to service, right? Even Jesus says, I came not to serve, not to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom. And so I think all of us as Christians are called to serve no matter where He places us. In fact, I was a pastor for many years, serving a congregation, but even in my role now and my role before that, always having that mindset of wanting to serve one another and lay down our lives for others, much like Davis did, much like Joe has done, much like you have done. We all do that, and that's our goal in life.
Joe, talk to us about your calling.
Yeah, I worked with youth for 20 years, and I can remember being in college, and I spent 10 weeks on a summer mission trip in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. serving the Lord there. And I got a chance in the midst of that to go out to Colorado and be part of a training event for Campus Crusade. And it was there that I felt the call into ministry. And I remember calling my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, and telling her, I feel like God's calling me to work in the church. I love this connectivity and the way God's present in all this. And her response was, I already knew that. I was like, well, when were you going to tell me? She said, I was waiting for God to tell you. Right? It's so important that He's the one that's leading that path. And so I worked with youth for 20 years and stepped away to be with my family. And then God's called me back to working with young people in a restaurant situation. And it's interesting because I work at a restaurant that's focused on serving our military. And the overlap of those values between the commitment and the humility and the service between those that have dedicated their lives to serve the police, the firemen, the military, people like that, and what I've experienced in the church, they just dovetail so well, humility and service and sacrifice.
Yep, commitment.
Absolutely.
And Jesus says it very well.
Yes.
If we looked at Proverbs 3:5-6, this Bible verse is so meaningful. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him and He will make straight your paths. That is so powerful and I think so much easier said than done. How, Joe, when you're dealing with young people, how can you have them grasp this idea that He will lead you straight on your paths?
I think the biggest part, the part I focus on in talking with young people about this is that there are paths, but we're not the author of those paths. So often young people want to chart their own course. And I think what that verse is really telling us is that God has a plan and a purpose for us. And when we acknowledge Him in that, He will direct us in those things. And He won't take us on detours. He won't take us off course. He'll take us directly where He needs us to be. And so it's helping young people to understand that by saying my paths, it's not that I get to choose where I'm going or what I'm doing, but it's understanding that I get to submit to the will of a good God who loves me, who has a great plan for me. And when I follow that, everything's going to fall into place.
Davis, how is it for you as an attorney? I'm sure you see people struggling. How do you sort of guide them into realizing that they need to follow God's path?
I think it's very different for each individual, but one of the blessings that I have in the work I do, a lot of it involves criminal defense for military members, is it's always sin that has put them in that position, right? And there are always consequences of sin. Even if they're not guilty of something they've been accused of, there's often a sin issue that's led to them into a compromised situation or otherwise. So it's this incredible opportunity to share the gospel with someone who's dealing with something so incredibly difficult and so much is out of their control, especially when we talk about the military. I mean, think of a senior military leader or a special operator who's been successful at everything. Now they're accused of something. Innocent or not, so much is out of their control, and it is a great opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to share the gospel.
Right, and sort of change their lives. And talk to me about you, Kurt, as far as you are working with pastors, and I'm sure at times they're struggling and really thinking, is this really God's path for me?
No, 100%. In fact, this is really my life verse, Proverbs 3. I love this verse, and because it reminds us a number of things. One, it reminds us that we're not to trust in our own abilities, our own understanding, our own thoughts, but we're really called to place our trust in God, and He's the one that's going to direct us. I think when we work with pastors and legislators, many times they are maybe operating out of their own understanding. But to challenge them and to read these verses with them and say, no, trust the Lord, look to Him, follow Him. And I think going back to the sovereignty of God that you mentioned about, Joe, trusting God's plan for our lives. We can become so anxious about what's next, or are we doing the right thing, or am I in the right position, am I in God's will? Well, yes, we're in God's will because God's the one who lays out our paths and calls us into whatever vocation He's called us into, and we can trust Him in it. Now, sometimes God's going to take us out of particular vocations, and that can be a scary thing, but we can trust the Lord in that as well.
Yeah, and how do you see that by following God? How has it really changed your lives?
Oh, wow, yeah. But I have seen, God has taken me through highs and lows of life, through some really deep, painful times in my life. And like I said, this is my life verse. And just understanding who God is and his sovereign plan for our lives, and that he's a good God no matter what we're going through, and we can trust him in it, that was massive for me. And I think many people who go through hard times, these are the theological truths that we need to cling to, whether we're going through good times or hard times. And that's what's going to get us through.
Yeah, I think one of the verses that speaks to me a lot is Proverbs 4:18, which said, "The path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter to the full light of day." And I think it's important just for all of us to recognize that when we're doing our best to follow God, to stay on that path, to stay in his will, he's going to show us the way. And I think it's an encouragement to know, served in full-time youth ministry, served as a full-time pastor, I've served as a pastor elder, and yet that's not what we're doing now, but God has called us to something else. So I think sometimes we see calling as a little too narrow. You've had a very special calling that allows you to have tremendous impact on so many people for the gospel. And I think all Christians need to live that way. How do I get up today and carry out what God has called me to today?
Our first calling is as a believer.
That's right.
Yes.
Right? And everything else kind of falls into place then.
Yep, and not looking too far ahead, right? So often we want to know where the end destination is, rather than trusting that God's got us where we need to be in that moment to do exactly what we're supposed to be. I've had so many conversations with youth being able to say, like, I don't know where things go in the future. I don't know the next steps, but I know the God who does know that, right? I know that he's good. I know that he's got a plan for you. And I don't know how this circumstance right here works out for the good in the end with those things. But man, those have been some of the most transformative and powerful experiences I've had. Sitting with young people, reminding them of God's goodness in the midst of that, and saying it's okay that you don't have every answer, because we know the God who does.
Yes, and there is a plan. And that's right. My pastor preached a series on being on mission. And it was something I prayed about because I was involved with television for a number of years. And a few weeks later, I got a call from Lighthouse TV. And it was like, you just don't know, like all of the experience that I've had personally sort of led me to this place right now. So it's something you just have to pray about being on mission, figure out what God's calling is, but don't question it. There is a plan. Thank you for this meaningful conversation this morning. And coming up next on Morning Light, he rose from humble beginnings, the son of a slave. He taught himself to read and later become the pastor of one of America's earliest mega churches, known today as Tindley Temple in Philadelphia. Jeff takes us on the Pennsylvania faith trail of Reverend Charles A. Tindley. That's coming up next. You are watching Morning Light right here on Lighthouse TV.
Welcome back. Well, between Philadelphia City Hall and 30th Street Station on Broad Street stands Tindley Temple. It's a massive stone complex which in so many ways was the spiritual home for African Americans in Philadelphia in the early 20th century. At the pulpit, Charles A. Tindley, pastor, educator, prolific hymn writer, the son of a slave who mastered Greek and Hebrew so well that he was able to pass his ordination exams in the Methodist Episcopal Church without ever going to seminary. His crowds were big and they were diverse. He was a friend of Christian movers like John Wanamaker. But sadly, he's a largely forgotten figure on Pennsylvania's faith trail. My friend Jillian Patricia Pirtle has been working very hard to change that reality. When tens of thousands of African American families fled north to Philadelphia, leaving the cotton fields of the Jim Crow South, it was a modern-day exodus. Reverend Tindley and members of East Calvary Methodist Episcopal Church were the sanctuary for many, growing into one of America's largest black congregations. Tindley was known as the Prince of Preachers, in many ways a modern-day Moses.
Tell me about this extraordinary space as it would have been in the day of Reverend Tindley at the pulpit where I'm sitting right now.
Reverend Charles Albert Tindley led a congregation of families, a congregation of communities, and a congregation of 10,000 strangers which had migrated from the deep south to the north and Philadelphia, looking for a new life, change, opportunity. And he was able to take those souls and wrap them up in the love of Christ, the spirit of fellowship, divine communion. And with that, he saw the need to make the community whole. He knew that these parishioners were in need of many different, various, vast things. So Sunday service was indeed a great worship, which was filled with the word of the Lord. Great music from the historic Muller organ that was brought as a gift by Mr. John Wanamaker. And also the need for these souls to have a new life. And that meant those who were going to need housing, those who were going to need jobs and job placement, and even more basic need of food. And he worked to provide all of those things in this historic sacred space and edifice in many different forms, whether it was the soup kitchen, the first in the city of Philadelphia, the tri-state area, to have and happen, where you had breakfasts, lunch, and dinners provided to the congregants and the community as a whole, even during the Great Depression, in massive amounts. An institute which was started so that the men and women could learn finance. They could learn how to build equity to start a life to buying homes, businesses, even literacy, teaching people how to read. This was Reverend Charles A. Tindley's life and mission. And the sanctuary was abuzz with that. There were those just coming from the south to the north and landing in Philadelphia and hearing of Reverend Tindley's work and the work of the mission in the church, and they had nowhere to stay. He allowed them to stay in the church and rest in the choir lofts, in the pews. He helped people find a new life. And it was all done through the sacred Word of God and reaching out to those who were lost, who needed help, and being a good shepherd. And he took that seriously. He knew what the responsibility was and the title of a leader and a shepherd meant, and he lived up to that.
And while Tindley Temple holds plenty of history, it isn't a museum. Dr. John Bryce now shares the gospel from where Charles Tindley once stood to preach on Sunday mornings. Still to come on Morning Light, if you've ever sung hymns like We'll Understand It Better By and By and Nothing Between, or The Storm is Passing Over, they come from the pen of Dr. Charles A. Tindley. That piece of this powerful faith trail from Philadelphia up next. Well, in the 1960s, one hymn above all other freedom songs of the civil rights movement stood out. We Shall Overcome. The original version was written by Charles Tindley. Its original title, I Shall Overcome, written about the reward awaiting every Christian at the end of a life of struggle and trial. But there's quite a bit more to the Tindley contribution to the hymnal. I asked Jillian Patricia Pirtle about the power of his music.
He was a hymn writer.
Yes.
In addition to his power from the pulpit, he's penning hymn after hymn after hymn, and so many of them pointing towards the end, pointing towards heaven, life beyond the travails of earth. What was his approach to hymn writing? What inspired him? What are the ones that are still in the hymnal today that we might recognize?
Early on, Reverend Tindley decided that the life in which he knew as a child from the Deep South, from the cotton fields, from the slave oppression in life in which he had grown into, born into, and faced, and then reaching freedom and his family reaching freedom. That mindset guided him through his pen writing of the hymns, of not just the current situation of where we are, but where we're going, where the Lord our God is taking us to, how we are going to reach the promise that he made for us in the scriptures, the word that he left for us, that we will reach the promised land. We will see those great gates of heaven. We will reach the destination if we follow his command, if we live the life that we are to profess to live as Christians. We will reach it someday. We will be there and we will see his face. And I think those inspiring messages, those words of comfort and hope through the hymns and the melodies are what sustain people through some of the darkest times of their lives, some of the saddest and lowest moments in our nation's history that people faced during the Great Depression and beyond. These are the hymns that live with us today. These are what we still sing and we abide in, by and by. And of course, Beams of Heaven, and there's so many more.
What's a hymn of his that you have turned to in your own moments of trial and crisis, fear and anxiety? What's the one that is a default on your playlist that survives from Reverend Tindley's pen?
I happen to have a great connection and kinship with Someday, which is also known as Beams of Heaven, because it's something that I was taught and I sang at the High School for Creative and Performing Arts, and it was beautifully arranged and rearranged over the years by incredible composers and arrangers. But it was my mother's favorite hymn of Reverend Tindley's. And knowing how much it meant to my mother and having just lost my mother and my best friend, it's what I cling to in the midnight hour when I feel like I can't make it. But By and By is beautiful because it's hope that through everything that we go through, we will, when the morning comes, see our Savior.
What a promise that is.
What a promise.
Any line or so, or a phrase or refrain of that?
By and by, when the morning comes, when all of the saints are come, they've gathered, they're home, we'll all be able to tell the story of how we've overcome. And then and only then will we understand it better by and by. When we're in situations and hardships and grief on this side of the shore in life, we don't understand it. And it's not of our understanding why we're going through what we're going through and why we're in these situations. But he has said, when we reach the other side, we'll understand. Then we'll know why. And I look for that day.
Thank you.
Well, we'd like to thank Jillian and the Tindley Temple family for sharing this insight on Dr. Charles A. Tindley. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Tindley's most popular hymns, you can check out tindleyphil.us. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break.
Welcome back. On the day Jeff visited Tindley Temple, one of Philadelphia's great organists happened to be practicing. He played one of Dr. Charles Tindley's great hymns, Beams of Heaven. So we are going to leave you with this music today. For Jeff and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Debra Pinkerton. Be sure to check on your neighbors. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you again next week.